This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right, it's confession time. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I finally cracked and paid for the Netflix subscription. I know, it's blasphemy. Run me up the flagpole, I deserve it. I did an entire diatribe at the end of last year talking about how I would never pay for Netflix and the pricing wasn't worth it, blah, blah. To be fair, not that I'm looking for any excuses here, that was prior to me learning that they were going to move a buttload of classic content over to the archives. Granted, they still haven't done anything with the old territory footage yet. But since we're doing these retro WWF reviews, I need to find a way to access the pay-per-view content somehow. And once I learned they started uploading all the in-your-house events plus the pay-per-views, I said, all right, they got me. Let me cancel Peacock real quick and then I'll buckle down and get a Netflix account. I'm not paying for the premium service, but for $8 a month, I can justify that. And there's no point in me having a Peacock subscription anymore since all the classic footage is gone. So it's not like I'm going to be paying for two streaming services. Like I said, it's the only way I can access the pay-per-view content now. Because we're not just reviewing the old Raws. You know, I'm trying to also do the monthly pay-per-view events. And that brings us to today's topic. The 1997 Royal Rumble. What many would consider a classic, at least when it comes to the Rumble match itself. We have that and the following night's Raw to recap. Gonna be a busy one this Monday. I'm also kind of losing my voice here. I think I'm coming down with either a cold or I don't know. Could be the beer bug. I may die right now as we all know it. No, I'm not going to do that. Folks, welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. The wrestling channel no one knows but everyone needs. We are the classic content gurus. We got 2 weekly shows where we go back and relive the glory days of pro wrestling. We got WWF retro content for the Monday shows. Fridays we got Mid-South and WCW. A lot of fun and exciting content to look forward to. And as always, I appreciate the people that come back to watch the show every week. Subscribe, comment, give it a like if you have not already. You can find us on Rumble and YouTube. Or YouTube and Rumble. It's weird saying it the other way around. Although I still encourage everybody to use the Rumble platform. As noted, got a lot of material to sift through here. And we're going to start with the big one. Let's get going with the review and see if the 1997 Royal Rumble still holds up. Now, as always, I like providing a bit of backstory before we dive into the cards. If you've been following the weekly Raw reviews, we know this pay-per-view was held at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas. Shawn's backyard. I actually forgot about this, but I'm pretty sure this stat is accurate. Up until the 2025 Royal Rumble, this is the highest recorded live gate the WWF ever did for a Rumble pay-per-view. 60,477 in attendance. Although I'm sure the Meltzer cucks will try and dispute those numbers. And just to give you an idea of how drastically things have shifted in one calendar year, going back to the 96 Rumble, the attendance figure was a little under 10,000. 1 year later, well over 60,000. Keep in mind, too, this is still during a major down period for the WWF, when business was really not good. WCW still had a massive lead in the ratings. Booking and week-to-week television for the WWF was very spotty still. Tickets were not selling well. They were not doing well with live events or house shows. This is kind of an anomaly when you compare it to the regular pattern business they were doing during this time, especially in January of 97. Now, another thing that might have helped is them doing package deals for selling tickets, doing the family prices to help fill out more seats and giving people discounts. I mean, imagine if they didn't do that for this event. Numbers would have likely been drastically different. Gotta love going back to a time when corporate greed wasn't a prospering business model with the WWE. Back before ticket gouging became the standard practice. So anyway, on a night billed as Shawn Michaels returning home as the prodigal son, looking for retribution against the man that dethroned him for the WWF Championship at Survivor Series, even though they're still trying to sell you on the idea that it wasn't about the title. It was about Shawn prioritizing the well-being and safety of his former mentor, Jose Lothario. Because we all know how greatly Shawn cared for Jose on camera over the last year. He may have acknowledged his existence on the fingers I can count on one hand. But joking aside, let's be honest, everybody knew going in that Shawn was winning the belt back here. That wasn't even up for debate. You know, then taking the belt off Shawn to begin with was their idea of trying to cushion the fall of all the blowback Shawn was getting for being a horrible world champion in 96. But it was only a matter of time before they just put the belt right back on him. Not to get too ahead of myself. We'll save all the Shawn talk for the title match later on. First, we need to sift through some of this prelim stuff, and believe me when I tell you, it was a rough hour to trudge through. The opener was Goldust versus Triple H for the Intercontinental title. This also marked the date that Mr. Hughes returned as Hunter's bodyguard, and/or butler, which is another failed experiment they quickly gave up on in a matter of weeks before eventually replacing him with Chyna. Vince was so nonchalant about it too. He's like, well, that fellow looks awfully similar to Curtis Hughes. It's like he didn't want to even acknowledge it was the real Mr. Hughes. I did laugh at the beginning of this thing when Goldust went to tackle Hunter in the aisleway. Remember, too, the whole backstory to this feud involves Hunter trying to sexually abuse Marlena for weeks on end. So Goldust runs Hunter down before the bell, but he also has to make sure that he gently tackles him to the concrete as to ensure he doesn't legitimately give the guy a concussion for a shoot. And then he starts wailing away on him. It was a funny visual. So we've now officially entered the period with the WWF booking where roles and stipulations were kind of haphazardly explained and or enforced. Technically, there was no announcement of this ever being no DQ false count anywhere. I believe it was supposed to be a straight wrestling match for the title. Meanwhile, you had multiple segments of this match where both guys are brawling on the floor while Hebner stood around watching. You had Goldust actively using the ring steps on Hunter as a weapon right in front of his fucking face. He just let it go. Jerry Lawler, the heel color commentator, wound up becoming the voice of reason, becoming apoplectic that the match kept going on. Even Vince had to acknowledge that he had a valid point. It also made absolutely no psychological sense that Hunter was the one working a knee injury throughout this match. Meanwhile, the alleged babyface is the one chop blocking Hunter from behind like a coward and using blatant low blows. Again, right in front of the goddamn referee. The announcer spent the entire match wondering whether or not it was no DQ to begin with. Because even they were never clued into what was going on, apparently. So, well, I know it might seem like I'm giving the implication that I didn't enjoy this match very much. It's mainly because I did not enjoy this match very much. Between me not being able to figure out who the fucking heel or face was, the fact that nobody could explain whether or not it was no DQ, it also didn't help that the match went 15 plus minutes and never got out of first gear. There was a point where Todd Pettingill went to interview Colin Ray, the famous country singer, who poorly sang Little Rock. Then they did some very awkward Caucasian comedy bits together, better known as dad humor. And it sucked. So fast forward to the last minute or two. Here's where the ridiculous overbooking came into play. In the order of events that took place, here is everything that went down in the last 90 seconds. Goldust missed a big diving elbow on Hunter. Mr. Hughes slid the IC title to Hunter. Marlena ran a distraction on Hunter while Hughes took the official. Goldust grabbed the belt from Hunter and hit him in the face. Mr. Hughes pulled Hunter out of the ring during a pinfall attempt. Goldust knocked out Mr. Hughes. Hunter jumped Goldust from behind and hit a pedigree for the pin. Did you get all that? Was that Russo-rific enough for you? I legitimately had to go back, pause the playback, and go frame by frame to make sure I accurately documented all the shit that took place at the end. That right there is a clear indication that you have way too much crap going on. When I have to go back and rewind just to see what happened in the last 30 seconds of the match, not good. I could not believe the amount of bullshit that took place at the end of this thing. The pay-per-view opener, by the way. Not even the main event title match. My God. You know, people like me often go back and wonder, why was I never a big fan of Triple H growing up? Is his IC title run not the prime example of why you grew up hating this guy? And not even the good kind of heel heat. Hunter had the go away, you suck, get the fuck off my TV kind of heel heat. The fact that he beat everybody on the roster and always had to use that fucking pedigree finish, no matter what the circumstance was. Guy could have been lit on fire and dropped out of a 50-story window. But you know that Hunter was still going to ride that elevator all the way down just so he could pick the guy up and Give him his pedigree finish anyway. Just to piss people like me off. So yeah, this pretty much sucked. Great retribution story for Goldust, by the way. Glad to see the good guy getting even on the evil asshole who tried to kidnap and molest his girl. Don't you just love happy endings? So after that royal slog, they showed a pair of pre-tapes with Bret Hart and Mankind hyping up the Rumble match later on. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because the payoff to the Mankind pre-tape was glorious. He talked about the Rumble match and for him how it's less so about getting the WWF title shot at WrestleMania. For him, it's about getting the opportunity to hurt people. Even his so-called close friends. And right as they pitch back to the ring to start the next match, you hear Vince on the headset go, "Wow." And there's a very awkward 10-second moment of silence following that comment, right before they queued up the Nation of Domination music. That made me laugh. I'm sitting there like, what the fuck was that dramatic pause for? Were Lawler or JR supposed to chime in with something? Because that was a lot of dead airspace that passed. It's hilarious. What wasn't hilarious was Farouk versus Ahmed Johnson. Unless by hilarious you mean hilariously bad, then maybe you got a case there. I am still blown away when I go back and look at the original members of this Nation faction. It's literally Farouk at the helm as the leader, surrounded by a pack of geeks. It's Crush, Clarence Mason, PG-13, and whatever random collection of black people they pay that week to come in to hold up the Black Fist sign. Like, I'm not even trying to make it a political statement because on the one hand, I definitely understood the idea behind the faction. Culturally, it kind of made sense with the times. Even though I think it was arguably 10 to 15 years too late, even by the late 90s when they were doing this. But objectively speaking, before they did a complete overhaul with the personnel later on in 97 and tried to at least push them on top with the bigger stars, when you look at the core members of the original Nation of Domination, this faction kind of sucked at the beginning. The other thing I thought about too, and we never really talked about this with the Raw reviews, mainly because we rarely ever see the Nation as the focal point of the TV episodes to begin with. Have they ever explained this group to the audience or what their mission statement is? Have we heard Farouk or Clarence cut the promo to explain what this faction's sole purpose was? To my knowledge, I don't think they have. They randomly repackaged Simmons at the end of last year and said he was in the Nation. From that point, we've barely seen any of that on TV. New members were just kind of arbitrarily added later on. It's wild to think that people talk so highly of the Nation of Domination as a group. But when you go back and see the initial faction, you're like, what the fuck is this group and why are any of these people associated? Like, the whole thing with Farouk and Ahmed's been going on since, late summer of 96? When they showed the footage of Farouk punting Ahmed in the kidney on TV. I'm pretty sure that was Farouk's actual TV debut. When he showed up in the gladiator outfit. That was months ago. And this fucking feud is still going. That is insane. So we finally get the alleged blow-off to this months-long program. I, again, reiterate many of the previous comments I made when it came to the IC title match. Was this or was this not a no disqualification match? I still have no fucking clue. Apparently whipping Ahmed with a leather strap and deliberately dropping him kidney first over a folding chair, those were not grounds for a blatant disqualification. Even though it happened right in front of the goddamn referee. Again, I don't care if the match is no DQ. That's not my point. Can you just explain what the fucking rules are? Especially if you're going to wind up throwing the match out anyway when all the geeks hit the ring. Like, none of this makes any sense. And like I said, this is not a good match at all. Between Ahmed's clunky offense, his terrible selling whenever Farouk was working him over, the fact that I'm just watching 10 bodies at ringside getting ready to hit the ring for the DQ at the end anyway, so I already know what the finish is going to be ahead of time. I mean, the real scary moment in this thing, after all the Nation dorks hit the ring to throw the match out, Ahmed grabs one of the PG-13 guys by the throat, and as he goes to lift him up to try to toss him out to the floor, he barely clears the ropes with the guy. Almost killed him. Just bad times all around. Everything about this feud. Everything about the first incarnation of the Nation. So I'm just going to move past that and go on to this Vader-Undertaker match. Here we are. 5 months removed from the infamous title match between Shawn and Vader at SummerSlam. And instead of walking into this pay-per-view as the WWF champion, which he would have been, had Shawn not gotten in Vince's ear, instead he's wrestling The Undertaker in a regular underneath match with nothing on the line. And while sure, he's still wrestling The Undertaker, it's not like he was out there jobbing to fucking Barry Horowitz or something. It is still a far cry from what Vader was doing on the card less than a year ago. Just throwing it out there. And there really wasn't much of an issue between Vader and Taker going into this match. You know, they had started teasing stuff with him and Sid for Mania, and then somewhere along the way they threw this Vader loophole into the mix. That's why it shocked me even more at the end to see Vader go over. Before we talk about that, though, there's a spot in this match where they yet again had Todd go up into the crowd to interact with the San Antonio fans. So they go to a split screen in the middle of Vader's heat to interview some girl who apparently saved up a bunch of money to pay for a ticket to come see the show live. Now, did she have an interesting story of how she saved up her money? Did she invest her funds? Did she win the lottery? Did something truly amazing happen in her life to where she came into a vast load of wealth? I mean, come on, this has got to be a fascinating story somehow, right? No, she saved up her money by babysitting. And she babysat for a very long time. Yeah, that was how she saved her money to buy a ticket. What a remarkable story. That's the kind of tale that gets over well at parties. Oh yeah, she also admitted to stalking Shawn Michaels in public. Not kidding. No, she openly admitted on camera that she was following Shawn around and watching him before she bought a ticket for this event. Question. Where are her parents? Were they supervising her when she was allegedly following this grown man around? And now, you know for a fact, if this was the other way around, and it was Shawn stalking this girl, now we know what would happen in that scenario. But because she's a young gal, an innocent young gal, it's just her fangirling over a celebrity. Because hypocrisy standards. By the way, I know there's a match going on. It really was not all that interesting. So Taker finally starts milking a comeback. And as he goes to give Vader the choke slam, out comes Paul Bearer with the urn. And he waddles his way down to ringside to set up a bunch of overbooked chicanery. By the way, it needs to be mentioned, both Vader and Taker were completely gassed by this point in the match. When Paul Bearer is the one sucking wind the least out of everybody in a brawl, you know you're cooked. And so we get this terrible finishing sequence where Taker goes after Paul on the floor, and while Taker's preoccupied with him, Vader's just kind of waiting in the background like a spare prick at the wedding. There's a spot where he clotheslines Vader out to the floor, and both guys look like they were having a hard time getting over the top rope. And, Taker ends up running into the guardrail after Paul pulled Vader out of the way. There was a great moment where Paul tried to hit The Undertaker over the back with the urn, but then fell flat on his ass afterward. That got a chuckle out of me. I was like, look at this fat fuck try to get offense in on Taker. And of course, he completely ate shit in the end. So Vader took advantage. He gave Taker the Vader bomb. And he got the pin. So at least if anything, you can say Vader beat The Undertaker. That's obviously going to set up Vader being one of the 4 guys in that elimination match next month at the In Your House to crown the new champion before Mania. In hindsight, that's probably the only reason Vader beat The Undertaker here. Well, that and also because of what went down in the Rumble match, which we'll talk about. But really, if you think about it, there really is no rational logic to having Vader beat The Undertaker here. Because like I said, they were already looking to WrestleMania for Taker to go after Sid. So it was a very odd booking call here. Like I said before, man, it was a real rough time getting through the first hour and a half of this pay-per-view. I mean, these undercard matches were plotting and I just call a spade. Boring. Truthfully, the best part of this segment was Undertaker flipping out afterward, killing the ref, and cutting a good old Texas-style babyface promo on Vince, where he unashamedly broke character and decided, I'm just going to be Mark Calloway for a hot second. That part was awesome. Also, yes, Paul Bearer and Vader are now aligned. They really made no effort in explaining how this pairing came together, aside from Paul Bearer still hates The Undertaker and is looking for any excuse possible to screw him over. Technically, as of this point, he's still managing Mankind. I think the sole purpose of them doing this was so they had a tag match they could book for Owen and Davey at WrestleMania. Because I do not remember the alliance going anywhere beyond Mania. It's only a matter of months before they start the build to Undertaker versus Kane. And And that's when things really finally start to get interesting for the Undertaker's storylines again. Beyond that, got nothing else to add here. Nor do I have anything to add when it comes to this completely unannounced, unadvertised six-man AAA match with all the Lucha guys. Perro Aguayo, Hector Garza, and Canek versus Heavy Metal, Jerry Estrada, and Fuerza Guerrera. I think I got all those names. I knew a couple of them offhand. I'm also very familiar with the musical genre of heavy metal. The Lucha wrestler, not so much. Again, this is all part of the collab deal that WWF was doing with AAA at the time. I think they booked a bunch of dark matches for this card. It featured a lot of the AAA talent. It was a concept that may have gotten more over with a smarter fan base if they were more well attuned to what was going on in the Mexican market around this time. But let's be honest, for most casual fans watching, they didn't give a flying fuck about these guys, much less knowing who they were to begin with. It's also pre-internet age, so, fans in attendance were just casual fans for the most part. The funny part in this match was Vince not knowing who anybody was. That and JR having great difficulty pronouncing a lot of the guys' names. Lawler didn't really have anything constructive to say, period, during this. I watched a lot of it in passing. The stuff I did pay attention to, a lot of the work was sloppy and didn't really connect with the audience all that much. No real definitive baby faces or heels. In all fairness, out of all the prelim bouts up to this point, it was better than Ahmed versus Farouk. I know that is a very low bar. But when it comes to the 97 Rumble, there were two things about this event that people primarily remember. There's Austin winning the Rumble and Shawn beating Sid to become the WWF champion again. And when it comes to the 97 Rumble match, like I talked about earlier, it's one of the more talked about Rumble matches. From an historical perspective, probably not the most riveting or exciting Rumble match to watch start to finish. But especially those closing 8 or 9 minutes. Those are the moments that I always think back and recognize this Rumble match for. And it was kind of a no-brainer going in. There really weren't many other options for winners aside from Austin going over. Brett, you can maybe make a case if you wanted to. But it really came down to Austin needing to win. He's the guy they've been breeding for success over the last 12 months. He's the guy they're trying to prioritize as the future of the company. They already took major steps in 96 by having him win King of the Ring. The feud with Bret Hart that really took him to the next level in helping to get over his gimmick and persona. And he's only growing in popularity. He's getting more and more over with the fans. And while things panned out a little differently in terms of how they worked out the WrestleMania 13 plans, even though Austin wound up not getting the title shot, this was still the right booking call for the time. When it comes to analyzing the match, I've already done a handful of these Rumble reviews. I typically don't like to dwell on every single entrant. I normally like to point out the highlights or the big moments. Took a lot of balls for them to sit there to determine that Crush and Ahmed Johnson should be the first two guys to start this thing. Two of the worst active talents on the roster they had at the time. Thankfully, they mainly stayed true to form with the 90-second entry form. So we didn't have to watch him wrestle for that long. Then, of course, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse than having to watch Ahmed and Crush wrestle, the ultimate rib for entry number 3, the fake Razor, who, objectively speaking, yes, Rick Bogner was absolutely a worse professional wrestler than both Ahmed Johnson and Crush. Not even up for debate. So he got thrown out like a total dweeb in a matter of seconds. Looking back, that might have actually been the very last appearance for the fake Razor. What a way to go out. Oh, and speaking of dweebs, Ahmed Johnson, the world's biggest moron, he eliminated himself by trying to chase Farouk to the back because he had no other choice than to leap over the top rope in order to leave the ring, apparently. Dweeb. So eventually Austin got in there. I think he was technically number 6, but their clock wasn't working correctly at first, so there were never any graphics or indication of who was coming out. But he wound up throwing out a bunch of guys. By far, one of my favorite moments in this entire match, aside from Austin winning, I had to go back and rewatch this spot over and over because I could not stop howling. So Austin's all fired up as he's coming to the ring, and he's trying so desperately to take off his ring jacket, but you can see this man is struggling big time. I don't even know how this is humanly possible. Somehow he ends up getting his arms so caught up in the jacket that he essentially handcuffed his arms around his back while he was sliding into the fucking ring. And not only does he wind up getting his arms tangled up, he smacks his head right off the side of the ring apron. Hysterical. Oh, and even better, as he's getting into the ring, one of the Godwins, I think it was Phineas, he immediately stomps Austin in the side of the head while he's completely defenseless. Like I said, I had to go back and rewatch that spot over and over again. It was phenomenal. Poor Austin. Like, all he had to do was calmly take his jacket off before getting in the ring. But damn it, he was so excited. Wound up making himself look like a jackass. As noted, though, Austin went on a rampage of consecutive eliminations once he got in. Dumped out Phineas, dumped out Bart Gunn. They had Jake Roberts come out to work with Austin a little bit, which was a nice homage back to their King of the Ring match the year prior. Didn't take long for the ring to clutter up with a bunch of bodies, though. Between the underneath WWF guys plus the AAA talent, I mean, there was a long stretch in the middle of this thing where there was a whole lot of nothing going on. You know, visually, and I think looking back, this was always one of my biggest qualms with the 97 Rumble. To me, it was always visually off-putting when I would look at guys like Austin and Owen Hart and Goldust, and then they're in the same ring with these random AAA guys that just looked like total outcasts. It looked indie to me. You know, I think so much of the AAA crossover issue really could have been avoided had they just focused on trying to spotlight the big stars from around the area during that time. Primarily Mil Mascaras. I mean, that would have worked so much better than trying to muddle up the ring with all these lesser-known AAA talents that the crowd didn't know shit from apple butter about. Like, for me personally as a fan, I don't want to see guys like Austin and Owen have to feed or sell for underneath AAA talent. There's a credibility issue there that rubs me the wrong way as a fan. It's the equivalent of me watching today's product and having to watch a Roman Reigns or a Cody Rhodes or an LA Knight feed or sell for these middle card NXT talents who, let's be honest, they haven't earned those spots yet. To put the shoe on the other foot, it's why I always hated the concept of Tony Khan's Forbidden Door pay-per-view. Beyond it just being a random New Japan versus AEW conglomeration of fuck-off matches, you're also seeing AEW's supposed top stars doing favors and selling way too much for lesser-known Japanese talent who are never going to draw money here in the States. And that's just a fact, Jack. No matter how you want to try and skew it. So they eventually clear out a bunch of guys so that it boils down to just Austin again. The entertaining part to all this is that Austin is trying so desperately to be a heel, but these San Antonio fans do not give a shit. They're still cheering for Austin like he's the biggest babyface on the roster doing these eliminations. And of course, them doing all these rapid-fire Austin eliminations is building to the eventual countdown where you hear Bret Hart's music hit. And now it's him and Austin solo. And that's when business finally picks up here in the Rumble. And all of a sudden, you're watching two main eventers go at it. So, well, I guess another highlight to the 97 Rumble, it was Terry Funk showing up and jumping the gun way too early for his actual entrance. And the clock didn't even hit the 1 second mark, and Funk was already 3/4 of the way down to the ring. I loved everything about it, too. He literally made a cameo here for the 97 Rumble match, literally to then go away for another 10 or 11 months, only to return to Raw at the end of the year, now being repackaged as Chainsaw Charlie. What a fucking run. It was also kind of ironic seeing him and Foley go at it as enemies in this match. And then less than a year later, we see them teaming up together going into WrestleMania 14 to wrestle the New Age Outlaws. Crazy how things can change within a year's time. Like I said though, at least by the time we got to the last 15 or so minutes, they had mainly gotten rid of most of the fodder. And we finally started seeing some of the bigger names like Vader and Rocky and Mankind and Terry Funk, eventually Taker. Names that the crowd were somewhat familiar with. And so we finally get this spot in this match where the story implication comes into play. Right as Mankind and Funk are seen brawling on the floor, they show the shot of Austin getting thrown out by Bret. But as we know, the referees were too busy trying to deal with Funk and Mankind on the opposite side of the ring, so they couldn't officially call Austin's elimination. Which, if you think about it, it was an incredibly clever booking tactic for the time. I don't think that concept had been done prior to this Rumble match. At least not in a way that factored into the finish. They did the double finish with Bret and Luger in 94, but that was way different than this. And to that point, they had Austin get back and dump out Taker and Vader. Meanwhile, Bret eliminated Diesel on the other side. So when Bret's back was turned, keep in mind too, he never saw Austin get back in the ring to begin with. So he was completely oblivious to all this. And so Austin snuck up, dumped Bret over the top rope. By now, the referees had broken up the fight between Foley and Funk. So they officially called the match for Austin. And you get all the post-match stuff with Bret flipping shit on the referees, going over to Vince and demanding that he do something. You can actively hear him mouthing words like bullshit and fucking shit. I think he dropped a goddamn in there too. Again, man, just leaning into the build of Montreal that much more. The single greatest work shoot in the history of pro wrestling. I cannot wait to piss off so many people when I review that pay-per-view in November. It's going to be a wild ride. Wilder than any of the build they're doing to the Survivor Series right now. Brett got screwed again. And that story progression came to a head here at the 97 Royal Rumble. He had the match won, but Austin threw everything for a loop when he came back in and dumped Brett out. You know, it's still one of my personal favorite Rumble finishes of all time. Regardless of what you think about the actual match in its entirety, I personally don't think all that highly of the 97 Rumble as a whole. But the finish to me is still iconic. One of the most brilliantly done finishes to a Rumble match in history. And it sets the stage for so much between now and not just WrestleMania, but now in Survivor Series. Especially when it comes to the dynamic between Brett and Vince on camera. So yeah. Loved everything about the closing 10 or so minutes when they finally got all the star power in there. The preceding 40 or so minutes, yeah. That I could probably do without ever having to watch again. It's a combination of many issues, not even just the AAA stuff. Just the simple fact that the WWF was really struggling for name power at this point. Which didn't lend itself to a great layout for the Rumble when they had to save so many of the top guys for the final 10 or so entrants. That's unfortunately what you get, though, when you're starving for top names. Still a whole hell of a lot better than who they had to work with the year prior. But it was still a growing period for them. But as we unravel one of the major stories going into WrestleMania 13, now we see how things completely fell off the map with their title picture. And it all started here with putting the fucking belt back on Shawn in the first place. And again, it was evident. Sycho Sid versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF title. They were in Shawn's hometown. They'd been developing a lot of Shawn's personality in the last year. Him breaking away from being the white meat babyface corporate champion, leaning more into this loudmouth, unpredictable, douchey type of babyface who people could still like on the surface, even though I thought the whole thing was a total farce. And they have been making efforts to make Sid come off more heelish in the lead up here. I mean, he fucking powerbombed Jose Lothario's son on live TV. It was pretty obvious what their endgame was. So, well, they did a pre-tape with Shawn beforehand talking about how he was ill going into the match. Was it true? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to tell with Shawn a lot of the time. He did sound a little under the weather, so I can give him the benefit of the doubt. He seemed perfectly fine throughout the match. Definitely performed like his regular self. Unsurprisingly, fans were way more pro-Shawn than Sid here. Stark contrast to what happened at Survivor Series in the Garden. Although they still had plenty of Sid fans in attendance, they couldn't mask all the boos. They also weren't going to be able to mask the overly cartoonish nature of Sid selling during this match. But that was also kind of the charm to watching Sid wrestle. He was always naturally cartoonish. You know, by and large, they kept most of the work pretty simple. It was oddly similar pacing to the match they had in November, but the roles were now reversed in terms of who was babyface and heel. You know, at least Shawn working as the babyface in peril got over more with the San Antonio crowd, especially as they were milking the comeback spot. And so we get the critical turning point where Shawn's running through a series of comeback moves. He drops the elbow on Sid and goes to set up the sweet chin music. But then Sid cuts him off and dumps him out to the floor. Gives him a powerbomb on the mat. And then he goozles Jose and Pete Lothario for a spot that led to, well, nothing. It led to him threatening to choke slam both of them until Pat Patterson stepped in, no-sold a kick to the stomach from Sid. And then he and Shawn got back in the ring and kept doing spots. They do the ref bump with Hebner, which JR sold with the line, "The ref's down. That's never a good sign." Totally telegraphing the soon-to-be bullshit we were about to see. And so first we had a second official rundown to try to make a pinfall count when Sid had Shawn down. But then Sid shit-canned that ref right as Jose got on the apron to run a distraction. Great line from Lawler, by the way, when he goes, "Well, he wasn't the right official anyway." And then JR goes, "What do you mean? He's got a striped shirt on." And so, well, Shawn ends up grabbing one of the ringside cameras. Because turnabout is fair play, as we all know. So he clocks Sid in the back and the chest with the camera. Sid does the worst selling job you've ever seen for it, which is also the greatest selling job for totally different reasons. And, well, it's still not enough to keep the big man down. So Shawn gives Sid the super kick, gets on top, 1, 2, 3. Big crowd pop as expected for the title change. And they really milked the hell out of that finish there at the end. God, would they give him like 6 minutes for a title celebration? And they really rolled out the red carpet for him. Tried to sell it like a big homecoming for him, which, I mean, that's exactly what it was supposed to be. But as we know, that story quickly devolved into chaos once we moved into the month of February. And you know, that really is sort of my lasting impression when I go back and watch this 97 Rumble in its entirety again. The WWE, I've often heard them use the term bizarro world. This whole time period from now until WrestleMania, it is the embodiment of that whole bizarro world nature. I mean, it's everything that comes from the result of this title win. And how when you really think about it, so much of this pay-per-view seems utterly pointless in retrospect. Think about it. Shawn regaining the title, Stone Cold winning the Rumble, Vader beating The Undertaker. It's just, so much of the booking to this show becomes totally inconsequential within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And like, even though I generally didn't think all that highly of this pay-per-view, it's odd to me how I go back and still enjoy the closing minutes to the Rumble. It doesn't make it one of the all-time great Rumble pay-per-views, but it does leave me with the thought that they had at least started to figure out who the major players were going to be and who was going to be at the top of the card within the next year. So at the time, before I knew how things would eventually play out, I was sort of let down with how this Rumble pay-per-view went. But as I got older and saw where the landscape of things would shift over time, it doesn't bother me so much now, because it all worked out in the end. It is a very strange pay-per-view to go back and review, but I don't hate it. I hated the 1996 Royal Rumble. I mean, that show just pissed me the fuck off because it was utterly predictable and boring. 97 was at least me looking at a fresh coat of paint and saying, there's still some uncertainty, and it makes the product more interesting. And if there's one thing about the WWF you can say in the year 1997, uncertainty was the perfect depiction of a lot of shit we saw go down that year. And you know what? I will at least give them this. Because of the finish to the Royal Rumble match, they gave people a hook for Raw the following night. The whole issue of who's getting the world title shot at WrestleMania. How's Commissioner Gorilla Monsoon going to handle this nightmare situation? Oh, by the way, in case you forgot, yeah, Monsoon is still technically the on-air commissioner. I don't even recall the last time we saw him on TV. Totally forgot he was still around. But they pretty much wasted no time diving right into the juicy stuff. Here comes Bret Hart. No music, no pyro, no pomp and circumcision. He's pissed off. He's got a lot to get off his chest, and he wants to air his grievances right to Vince McMahon. He won't even let them run down the card for the show. He gets in there and immediately starts raking Vince over the coals, talking about how for the last 6 months he's been screwed at every turn, saying that Vince promised if he came back to the WWF last year, he would get a title shot immediately. And all he's gotten are roadblocks and obstacles thrown in his way. Whether that's Shawn costing him the belt during his match with Sid at the December In Your House, or Austin dumping Bret out of the Rumble match when he was already eliminated. And seeing how it's obvious that Bret's not going to get a title shot at WrestleMania, he's got a solution. He quits. Now, I have some notes here about my take on the whole situation, but let me at least get through the bulk of Seg 1, and then we can come back and revisit the Bret conversation. So after Bret hops the guardrail and starts making his way through the crowd, Stone Cold comes down and starts cutting a heel promo on Bret. And of course, because this is the WWF in 1997, where the production team didn't know their ass from a hole in the ground, evidently Austin's mic didn't work. So he's cutting a promo into a dead mic for like 30 whole seconds, not realizing it's not being picked up over the house mic. Finally, a stagehand comes over and gives Austin a functioning microphone, to which Austin had the best response. "Are you going to give me working equipment, son, or am I going to have to beat your ass?" Big pop for that remark, unsurprisingly. And so Austin basically reiterates what he tried to say a minute ago. How Bret's nothing but a crybaby. How he does nothing but blame everybody for his setbacks. How he'd be better off going back to Canada and wrestling his crippled, broken down father, because that's probably the only man Bret can take in a legit fight at this point. And you know, it's like, the longer Austin kept going here, like him taking all these shots at Bret for being a bellyacher and a sore loser, you know, he's not entirely off base. I know he's still a heel, but Austin's making some really valid points. And Bret Hart, keep in mind, at this point, he's still supposed to be a babyface. And this guy's coming out on live TV bitching and moaning like a prepubescent teenager, burying the owner of the company and saying he's done nothing but screw him over for the last 6 odd months. I'm like, okay, first of all, your entire premise here is that Vince is deliberately screwing you over. How? He gave you exactly what you wanted, dude. He gave you a title shot for In Your House. You lost. Shawn interference be damned. You still got your opportunity for the title at the pay-per-view. What's your gripe? Now, the Royal Rumble argument, sure, you could definitely make a valid case for that. You know, him being hot at Vince is a little strange if you're not really reading much into it. Being under this paranoid assumption that Vince is conspiring to fuck him over at every turn. It's just... Man, it's amazing to see how much I'm being validated in my long-time assertion that Montreal is the greatest work shoot in the history of pro wrestling. Seriously, how do you look at a segment like this and not think, this is absolutely being done with the intent to build to the payoff of Vince screwing Brett for the title later on? There's so much about this opening 9-minute segment that I could go on for ages. So many small and delicate details that lead you to think anyone that still buys that the Montreal Screwjob was a complete 100% shoot, you're delusional. If you're still one of those fans that buys into the WWF propaganda that Montreal had no elements of the fans being worked, go back and watch this segment in full. I promise you'll start to rethink your position. So after all that took place, here's a quick laundry list of things that happened and essentially became pointless by the time we came back from commercial. Steve Austin was originally supposed to wrestle Sid, but then Sid got a concussion in storyline. Translation, he probably no-showed Raw the following night because he didn't feel like wrestling. So Austin called out The Undertaker because apparently that was the backup plan for Austin's match. So they pitched a break. We hear Austin call out The Undertaker. We see Vince making his way up the aisleway toward Gorilla. They come back. And then all of a sudden in the ring, we have Davey Boy and Owen Hart getting ready to wrestle Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn. No explanation as to where Austin went. He completely vanished. I guess someone came up to him and said, "Your match isn't until later, Steve." And Steve said, "Okay," and left. Because that sounds like something the Stone Cold character would do. Patiently wait in the locker room until his scheduled match is set to happen. So the wrestling in this match was very good. They still have the lingering dilemma that nobody gives two flying fucks about Furnas and LaFawn as a tag team. There was one particular spot in this match that blew me away, and it was one of those, they could not have executed it more beautifully if they tried. Bulldog gives LaFawn a shoot off into the ropes, and as he goes to do the drop down spot, LaFawn trips over Davey's body. Meanwhile, Owen had already leapt off the top rope to try to hit LaFawn with a missile dropkick. And he still landed the dropkick perfectly. And he also landed on top of LaFawn in a perfect pinning position. That right there is why Owen Hart is one of the all-timers, man. Poetry in motion. Everything that guy did in the ring. I also did take note of JR running down the live event schedule for the week. It was funny to me because it was a total WWF schedule. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they're basically running the Mid-South and Dallas territories. I think it was Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and then Dallas. And then he gets to Friday. Hershey, Pennsylvania. I'm like, not even fucking close. But it makes sense with the way WWF ran live events during the time. Actually, most promoters did dumbass shit like that. Bill Watts used to make the boys drive 500-mile round trips for no logical reason. So nothing shocks me at this point when I hear guys talk about the crazy road schedules back in the day. So things broke down toward the end. LaVon kind of botched a DDT spot onto Davey, which set up Owen coming in to get speared by Furnace. And as the ref was trying to get Furnace back on the apron, Owen tripped up LaFon from the outside, hit him over the head with the Slammy Award so Davey could pin him. One thing I forgot to mention during the Rumble recap, they did an angle with Owen and Davey in the match where it looked like Owen deliberately threw Davey Boy out, even though he tried to claim it was accidental. They were making such a big deal about it at the pay-per-view. So naturally, 24 hours later, JR casually goes on commentary, "Oh yeah, they made up earlier in the day. Things are fine now." No dissension in the match. No miscue spots between the champions. They just worked together perfectly like nothing happened the previous night. Now, as far as I know, I don't think they dropped the storyline between Owen and Davey. Owen's about to become a member of the Hart Foundation after Mania, but I seem to recall them being at the center of the main feud over the European Championship, because they're about to introduce that belt pretty soon. I think they end up wrestling in the finals for it or something. Then somehow they do a breakup angle to split as tag partners. I forget how they wind up dropping the belts. So it wasn't a case of them dropping something that had no intent. They just didn't really draw much attention to it, which is fine. Slow burn, I guess. So then we had Farouk versus Bart Gunn. Farouk accompanied by the Nation and the rest of the peanut gallery, for lack of better terms. It was basically the same conglomeration of random geeks we saw at the pay-per-view, minus the guy that got dumped through the announce table. As expected, there really wasn't much to the match. Painfully boring. Bart Gunn sucks, but he was basically fodder for Simmons here. He tried to go after PG-13 on the floor, but ended up getting posted. And then Farouk nearly killed him with a sloppy Dominator for the 3. Looking back, I still have no idea why he used that as a finish. I never thought Ron Simmons had a good Dominator. Every time I see him give it to someone, it looks like he's about to drop the guy right on his fucking neck. But that was a quick in and out deal. And then as the Nation's heading to the back, out come Vince and Gorilla Monsoon to provide an update on all the controversy we saw at the Rumble. He is proposing a special Four Corners elimination match at the In Your House pay-per-view in February. With Austin's tainted Rumble victory, it's the best solution that Monsoon can come up with to make things right. And he actually did a very thorough job explaining all this. The match is going to be The Undertaker versus Vader versus Bret Hart, should he accept the invitation and unquit, versus, obviously, Stone Cold. Now, Taker and Vader were illegally eliminated by Austin, so they also deserve a second chance. And, keep in mind, too, at this particular point, this is pre-Shawn Meltdown, before the infamous I Lost My Smile promo. So it is being declared as a #1 contenders match at this point, even though by the time we get to the pay-per-view, it ends up being for the vacated belt. But that was how they settled the controversy. Short and sweet delivery from the commissioner. I also got a kick out of the ending when Vince went to try to shake Monsoon's hand, but Monsoon had already turned his back to leave the ring. You see Vince grab him and pull him back and be like, "No, motherfucker. You shake my hand, god damn it. You're not going to leave the chairman high and dry like that. Not when the cameras are rolling." Now, there was more to the segment. Once Austin caught wind that he was going to be a part of this four-way, he came down to spit some fire at Monsoon, telling him that he shouldn't be in this match because he already tossed 29 other pieces of trash over the top rope to win the damn title shot. If by 29 he means like 8. Well, he's right. But then he agrees to be in the match anyway, rendering that whole bit of verbiage completely superfluous. And so then Bret starts making his way back to the ring, through the crowd, by the way. And he gets in the ring and accepts the offer to be in the match. And then he and Austin got into a brawl in the aisleway before they cut the break. The whole Bret stuff on this episode was so bizarre. He quit because he thought he was being screwed. Then he left through the crowd. Allegedly just stood around waiting for an Uber or something. I know they didn't have Uber in the late 90s, but the point remains. What the fuck was Bret doing in the building for the last 40 minutes? If he quit, why did he stick around? Wouldn't he just up and left? You know, if this were real, sorry to bring it up, gotta find continuity on the show somehow. So then we get Austin versus Taker in the main event. Anyone that's seen these two go at it before knows the kind of chemistry they had together. Other than Austin blatantly calling out spots that were being picked up by the hard cam, match was perfectly fine. I mean, you could hear him blatantly call, "Neckbreaker," right before he shot Taker off. And like a minute later, he called, "Back elbow." It's still not as egregious as the way Cena used to call spots in matches, but come on, guys. Hide your shit better. What irked me in this match was Taker giving Austin a blatant kick to the groin right in front of fucking Hebner, who just shrugged his shoulders and pretended nothing happened. I was like, are you serious, dude? You can't tell me you sneezed at that precise moment and didn't see that kick. So anyway, they're going back and forth for a bit. Lawler was insufferable on commentary. He's calling for Austin to go after Taker's ribs because that was an injury angle they did the other night at the Rumble pay-per-view. But it was through the whole goddamn match. "The ribs, Austin! Go after the ribs! Austin, the ribs! The ribs!" I wanted to reach my hand through the fucking screen and punch him in the face. They also cut to the back before commercial to show Vader and Bret getting into a fight. So you pretty much could call the lame DQ finish a mile ahead. And so, lo and behold, Vader ends up jogging down to the ring to get the match thrown out. I use the term jogging liberally. If I wanted to be precise, I would call it middle-aged woman sprinting, which is essentially jogging, but far less graceful. And then obviously you had Bret come out to join in the mass brawl. Crowd was going ballistic for it. I mean, you think it wasn't too often you saw this kind of crazy stuff back in the day, especially on WWF television. So everyone really dug the last 2 or 3 minutes. You know, I think we're desensitized as fans now because we see this kind of crap every week. Most of the fighting looks faker than anything that happened here. And this was by no means a great brawl. But it accomplished what it needed to in order to sell the main event for the next pay-per-view, which is still like 4 weeks out from this point. That was probably the most eyebrow-raising thing about this. And they got like 4 more weeks to build this thing up, and they essentially steamrolled through 2 weeks of storytelling in less than an hour. It's all a part of that hotshot booking philosophy going on during this time. But you know, compared to a lot of the lame shit we were accustomed to seeing on Raw lately, this is kind of a breath of fresh air. I mean, I liked everything they did here by and large. Just probably could have spread it out over a few weeks to let it stew. Because where do they go from here now? That's the question. How do you keep the same level of excitement going for 3 more weeks? Guess we'll find out as we go back and recap these Raws. Shows are becoming a lot more intriguing, though, I'll say that. There's a sense of changing times with the way these Raws are being formatted in 97. It's not all great. There's still a lot of garbage to sift through. But at least the shows are more exciting and energetic compared to anything we were getting for the last 3 years of death television. I use exciting with a caveat because, I mean, they do eventually jump the shark once Russo's fingerprints get all over this God-blessed program. And then it just becomes way too much Crash TV bullshit every week. It's impossible to keep up with anything or figure out what's going on. But we haven't entered that phase yet. So, enjoy it while it lasts. And on that note, we will go ahead and close the show up here. Covered a lot of ground this week, but it's all part of the Retro series. And when we reconvene next time, it'll be the Friday edition. So, folks, we'll catch you all then. Thanks for watching, and talk to you soon. Take care. Peace out.